Nobody saw this coming. Not the front office, not the media insiders, and definitely not the league executives who thought they had everything under control. Because when Caitlin Clark quietly finalized her shocking new partnership with NBC, it wasn't just another media deal. It was a warning shot. A warning that sent shockwaves through the WNBA's highest offices. And insiders are now whispering that Cathy Engelbert is panicking behind closed doors. You see, this wasn't supposed to happen like this. The league believed they controlled the narrative. They believed they controlled the spotlight. They believed no single player could ever become bigger than the brand itself. But then Caitlin Clark happened. And now, the biggest fear the commissioner has allegedly been hiding for years may have just exploded into public view. And sources claim this NBC move changes everything. Broadcast control, revenue leverage, player power, even locker room politics. And here's the terrifying part. This deal might not just elevate Clark. It might expose cracks in the WNBA's entire power structure. Because according to leaked conversations circulating among media executives, there's one phrase that keeps coming up. If Clark walks, the numbers walk. Let that sink in. TV ratings, sponsorship dollars, prime-time slots, corporate investment, all suddenly orbiting around one name. And if that's true, then the commissioner's biggest fear isn't competition. It's losing control. And what we uncovered next makes this even more explosive. To understand why this NBC deal has insiders whispering and executives sweating, you have to go back to the beginning. Before the primetime interviews, before the national campaigns, before the sold-out arenas that suddenly started showing up on broadcast spreadsheets, before Caitlin Clark became the center of every ratings conversation in women's basketball, she was already rewriting expectations. When she entered the league, executives thought they were prepared. They weren't. From the moment she stepped onto a WNBA floor, ticket demand spiked. Secondary market prices jumped. Road games suddenly felt like playoff atmospheres. Teams that had never worried about overflow seating were scrambling to relocate games to larger arenas. And quietly, deep inside league headquarters, there was already tension building. Because historically, the WNBA had been structured around parity, around collective branding, around the idea that no single player should ever overshadow the league itself. That philosophy traces back to long-standing leadership principles reinforced under Commissioner Cathy Engelbert, who publicly emphasized unity, competitive balance, and shared spotlight. But here's the problem. Caitlin Clark didn't fit into that structure. She didn't grow inside it. She transcended it. Television numbers told a story executives couldn't ignore. Games featuring Clark were pulling dramatically higher viewership. Social media engagement doubled. Jersey sales surged beyond projections. And then something even more unsettling started happening. Broadcasters began negotiating around her. Not around the league, around her. Networks weren't just asking for WNBA packages. They were asking, when is Clark playing? And that's when NBC entered the picture. NBC has been aggressively repositioning its sports portfolio, especially with upcoming major media cycles approaching. They wanted a face, a generational crossover figure, someone who could pull mainstream attention beyond traditional sports audiences. Clark wasn't just a basketball star. She was a cultural moment. According to insiders, NBC executives saw something league leadership was hesitant to fully embrace. That Clark's appeal wasn't confined to the WNBA ecosystem. It was national, commercial, prime-time viable. And that's where the quiet friction began. Because if NBC elevates Clark independently, through special segments, feature programming, promotional campaigns, it shifts leverage. Leverage away from centralized league branding, icon toward player-specific influence. And that's the commissioner's nightmare scenario. For years, the WNBA has fought to build collective bargaining power, sponsorship unity, and shared marketing identity. It's been a strategic effort to ensure the league itself remains the product, not a single individual. But Clark changes the math. when her games drive disproportionate ratings, when her presence dictates national time slots, when her interviews trend higher than league announcements. It forces one uncomfortable question. What happens if she gains enough leverage to negotiate beyond league structures? Sources close to broadcast negotiations suggest NBC's interest wasn't limited to airing games. It included expanded storytelling, documentary-style features, studio segments, possibly even personality-driven programming. That's not normal for a rookie. That's superstar territory. And within league circles, there are whispers that not everyone is thrilled. Some veterans reportedly feel the spotlight imbalance. Some executives worry about sustainability. And league leadership faces a delicate balancing act. Promote the star without losing structural authority. Because here's the truth no one wants to say publicly. If one player becomes bigger than the league's infrastructure, power shifts. And once power shifts, it rarely shifts back quietly. The commissioner's public statements have remained measured, professional, supportive. But according to one anonymous front office source, there was a closed-door meeting where executives discussed long-term brand implications of Clark's rising independence. That's corporate language for fear. Fear that broadcast partners might start prioritizing star power over league cohesion. Fear that advertisers might tie contracts to individual appearances. Fear that if Clark ever decided to leverage her popularity for contract negotiations, scheduling influence, or media independence, the league wouldn't hold the strongest position. And now this NBC deal has turned those private concerns into very public speculation. Because it signals something undeniable. Clark doesn't need the spotlight handed to her. She can attract it on her own. And if that's true, then the biggest fear inside the commissioner's office isn't competition from other leagues. It's losing narrative control within her own. But what happened next made the situation even more volatile. Because this wasn't just about media rights anymore. It became personal. And the first major confrontation changed everything. The tension didn't explode on social media. It didn't start in a press conference. It started in a closed-door meeting that was never supposed to leak. According to multiple industry insiders, just days after the NBC partnership details began circulating, league executives held an emergency strategy session. Not a routine media call, not a casual planning meeting, an emergency session. At the center of it all, Caitlin Clark, and hovering over the conversation like a storm cloud, the growing concern that NBC's involvement wasn't just promotional, it was transformative. Because here's what allegedly rattled leadership the most. NBC didn't want Clark as part of a shared package. They wanted her story, her voice, her brand, on their terms. And if that sounds harmless, you don't understand how fragile league power structures can be. For years, the WNBA under Kathy Engelbert has operated with careful messaging. Every sponsorship, every broadcast slot, every marketing campaign coordinated through league channels. The system is centralized for a reason. Control equals stability. But Clark's NBC discussions reportedly included personal storytelling segments, potential studio appearances outside standard league programming, and even cross-platform exposure that wouldn't be entirely filtered through WNBA communications. And that's when the first confrontation allegedly happened. A source claims that during a tense call between league officials and broadcast representatives, one executive bluntly asked, "Are we promoting the league, or are we promoting Caitlin Clark?" Silence. Because that question carries weight. If NBC's ratings projections show that Clark alone drives disproportionate numbers, advertisers start negotiating differently. Sponsors start asking about specific player guarantees. Primetime slots begin revolving around her schedule. And once that happens, the balance shifts. Here's where things get even more dramatic. Within 48 hours of the deal being reported, internal analytics data supposedly circulated among executives showing viewership spikes tied almost exclusively to Clark's appearances. Not just incremental growth, massive jumps. One insider allegedly summarized it like this: "When she's on, casual viewers tune in. When she's off, they vanish. That's not just star power, that's dependency. And dependency terrifies commissioners. Because if the league's national momentum becomes too attached to one player, negotiating leverage changes overnight. Imagine contract renewal talks where networks say, "We'll pay this amount, but only if Clark's featured prominently." Imagine advertisers requesting clauses tied to her presence. Imagine player empowerment discussions where she holds more sway than the centralized office. That's not theoretical anymore. It's plausible. And then the first twist hit. A private memo, reportedly drafted within league headquarters, began circulating among select insiders. The memo allegedly outlined contingency planning for scenarios involving player-specific broadcast leverage. Contingency planning. That phrase alone sent fans spiraling when rumors leaked online. Was the league preparing for a future where Clark could outgrow them? And was this about protecting brand equity or limiting player influence? Social media exploded. Fake screenshots of supposed internal emails started trending. One viral post claimed an executive wrote, "We cannot allow any one individual to dictate the league's national profile." Was it real? No one can confirm, but it felt real enough. And perception is everything. Fans quickly divided into camps. One side argued Clark earned every opportunity, that her ratings boost proved she deserved expanded exposure, that elevating her elevates everyone. The other side warned of imbalance, of locker room tension, of a system destabilized by celebrity culture. And through it all, Clark remained publicly silent. No defensive tweets, no emotional interviews, just calm appearances and composed post-game comments. But silence can be louder than outrage. And because while the league debated strategy, NBC reportedly accelerated plans. According to insiders, promotional material drafts positioned Clark front and center, not as one of many faces. As the face. And that's when veteran players allegedly started asking questions behind the scenes. Was the league prepared for the optics? Would marketing budgets shift disproportionately? Would scheduling decisions begin revolving around television value rather than competitive fairness? Those questions don't just challenge branding, they challenge governance. And governance is the commissioner's domain. Under Kathy Engelbert, the league has fought hard to present unity and structured growth. Allowing one player to dominate narrative space threatens that carefully maintained balance. Then came the bombshell rumor. A broadcast insider hinted that NBC's internal projections estimated Clark-driven programming could outperform some established sports properties in certain markets. If that's true, the leverage isn't symbolic, it's measurable. And measurable leverage changes negotiations. Suddenly, hypothetical scenarios started circulating. What if Clark negotiates personal media rights expansion in her next contract cycle? What if she influences future broadcast packaging terms? What if advertisers approach her independently at a scale the league can't fully regulate? That's not just growth. That's power redistribution. And here's the first major twist that turned anxiety into panic. A source claimed that during one private discussion, an executive reportedly said, "If we lose her narrative control, we lose everything." Narrative control. That's the heart of it. Because this isn't just about basketball, it's about who tells the story. If NBC amplifies Clark independently, they shape the narrative. If Clark gains autonomy over her media presence, she shapes the narrative. And if the commissioner loses centralized oversight of that narrative, authority weakens. And once authority weakens in professional sports governance, it's nearly impossible to restore quietly. But just when fans thought this was about ratings and contracts, another twist surfaced, and this one made everything personal. Because behind the scenes, whispers began suggesting that this wasn't the first time league leadership had feared a breakout star shifting power dynamics. History was repeating itself. Only this time, the scale was bigger, the spotlight brighter, and the stakes far higher. And what leaked next? It might confirm that the commissioner's biggest fear isn't about media deals at all. It's about losing control of the future. If you thought the tension was just about ratings, think again. Because what surfaced next didn't just rattle executives, it ignited a full-blown narrative war. Within days of the NBC deal gaining traction, insiders claim a second development blindsided league leadership. NBC wasn't just planning promotional segments. They were allegedly exploring long-form storytelling, documentary-style content, behind-the-scenes access, personality-driven features centered around Caitlin Clark, content that could exist independently of traditional WNBA branding structures. And that's when the whispers turned into alarms. Because once storytelling leaves centralized control, perception becomes fluid. And in perception drives power. A media analyst reportedly summarized it like this: if NBC frames Clark as the transformative figure of the league, then the league becomes the supporting cast. That line circulated like wildfire. Suddenly, sports talk panels were debating not just her talent, but her influence. Clips from studio discussions began trending. Is Clark bigger than the WNBA? Is this the moment player power shifts permanently? Even casual viewers were weighing in. Fake screenshots of NBC production boards started appearing online, showing Clark-themed segments labeled The Catalyst and Redefining the Game. Were they authentic? Unclear. But the symbolism was undeniable. The conversation had shifted. And inside league offices, that shift reportedly triggered strategic countermeasures. Each sources suggest emergency PR planning sessions were held to reinforce collective messaging, emphasizing team narratives, league milestones, and shared achievements. Because if Clark becomes synonymous with league success, it undermines decades of brand positioning built around unity. And here's the shocking reveal that changed everything. A broadcast insider hinted that NBC's internal forecast suggested Clark-related programming could justify independent advertising packages. Let that sink in. Independent packages. That means sponsors potentially buying space specifically tied to her appearances, not just generic league slots. If that happens, the power equation transforms overnight. Because money dictates influence, and influence reshapes governance. Suddenly, debates that once felt hypothetical became immediate. What if advertisers request guaranteed Clark exposure in future deals? What if networks prioritize her games for premium time slots regardless of competitive standings? What if player negotiations begin factoring in individual media leverage? And here's where it gets explosive. An alleged internal conversation, leaked through anonymous sources, claimed that during a private strategy discussion, one executive warned, "We are watching the emergence of a parallel power structure." Parallel power structure. That phrase alone sent shockwaves through social media. Because in professional sports, parallel power structures create instability. They create factions. They create political tension. Fans immediately split into camps. And supporters of Clark argued that this is exactly what the league needs. A breakout figure capable of pulling mainstream audiences. Critics warned of imbalance and locker room resentment. Former players chimed in with carefully worded takes. Some praised her generational impact. Others subtly reminded audiences that the league is built on collective excellence. Meanwhile, Kathy Engelbert maintained a composed public demeanor, emphasizing growth, opportunity, and partnership alignment. But behind the scenes, sources describe a different atmosphere. High-stakes planning sessions, legal consultations about media boundaries, brand protection discussions. Because if Clark's media presence expands beyond centralized oversight, the commissioner's authority doesn't disappear. It dilutes. And diluted authority in a rapidly growing league is dangerous. Then came the moment that escalated everything. NBC released a teaser highlighting Clark's upcoming national segment. The framing? Bold, transformative, almost mythic. Commentators described her as the face of a new era. Not one of many faces. The face. Within minutes, social media erupted. Trending hashtags debated whether the league had unofficially crowned her its defining figure. Memes circulated showing ratings charts spiking during her games. Speculation threads exploded with theories that NBC was positioning her as the cornerstone of future broadcast negotiations. And here's the twist that turned whispers into outright fear. A prominent media executive suggested publicly that Clark's crossover appeal could redefine how women's basketball is packaged nationally. And redefined packaging. That's corporate language for restructuring deals. If broadcast packaging shifts around individual star value, the league's centralized negotiating power weakens. And that's the commissioner's worst-case scenario, because centralized negotiation is how leagues maintain equilibrium. If networks begin negotiating from a star-first perspective, that equilibrium fractures. And once fractured, it's nearly impossible to reassemble cleanly. But the most shocking revelation wasn't about contracts. It was about influence. An insider reportedly claimed that NBC executives floated the idea of featuring Clark in cross-sport promotional campaigns, integrating her presence alongside major properties. That elevates her beyond league confines. That makes her a mainstream sports figure. And when a player becomes mainstream beyond league dependency, control shifts subtly but powerfully. The fear isn't that she'll leave. The fear is that she won't need to. Because if her brand grows independent of league structures, she gains leverage without confrontation. And leverage without confrontation is the most destabilizing kind. Now, the question isn't whether Clark is the league's biggest draw. The data already answers that. The question is whether the league can maintain authority in a landscape where one player's media gravity threatens to bend the entire system around her. And just when it seemed like the narrative couldn't escalate further, a new rumor surfaced. One suggesting that upcoming contract discussions could include unprecedented media flexibility clauses. If that happens, everything changes. Because then this isn't just about NBC, it's about the future of player power in the WNBA, and whether the commissioner's biggest fear is already becoming reality. The moment that NBC teaser aired, the internet didn't just react, it detonated. Within minutes, timelines were flooded with split-screen graphics of Caitlin Clark standing under bright studio lights, contrasted against images of league boardrooms and broadcast logos. The narrative was no longer subtle. It was confrontational. Clark just became bigger than the WNBA. That tweet, real or not, racked up thousands of reposts. Sports debate shows pounced. Analysts argued over whether this was the dawn of a new player empowerment era or the beginning of institutional instability. One former executive claimed on air, "When a single athlete drives disproportionate value, the governance model must adapt," or fracture. That word again, fracture. Meanwhile, supporters framed the moment as historic progress. They argued that Clark's rise forces the league into mainstream relevance. That visibility equals sustainability. That star power fuels growth. But critics weren't quiet. Threads emerged accusing NBC of manufacturing a monopoly spotlight. Others warned that overemphasizing one player risks alienating veteran stars who've built the league brick by brick. And somewhere in the middle of this digital storm sat Commissioner Kathy Engelbert, publicly calm, privately, according to insiders, calculating. Industry insiders began weighing in anonymously. One marketing executive reportedly said, "Advertisers follow numbers, not sentiment. If Clark's numbers outperform, budgets shift." Shift. That's the word echoing through boardrooms. Because budget shifts lead to influence shifts. Influence shifts lead to policy adjustments. And policy adjustments can create tension inside locker rooms and front offices alike. Then came the celebrity reactions. Prominent sports figures praised Clark's crossover appeal. Entertainment personalities applauded NBC for recognizing generational impact. But not everyone celebrated. A retired WNBA legend posted a cryptic message. "Leagues survive on foundations, not flash." Fans immediately dissected it as a subtle critique. Was it jealousy, concern, institutional loyalty? Speculation ran wild. Meanwhile, business analysts published breakdowns comparing Clark's broadcast draw to emerging sports properties across networks. suggesting that NBC may have identified a long-term ratings catalyst. If true, this wasn't just hype, it was strategy. And strategy implies foresight, which means NBC likely anticipated the internal turbulence and did it anyway. That's what intensified the fear narrative. Because if a network is confident enough to build around a single player, they've done the math. And math doesn't lie. Fan debates became emotional. One side shouted, "She saved the league." The other countered, "No one is bigger than the league." Hashtags trended for hours. Fake leaked emails resurfaced again, suggesting that some executives feared star imbalance. Authentic or not, they fueled the narrative. The story wasn't about basketball anymore. It was about power, about control, about whether the commissioner could maintain centralized authority in an era of amplified individual branding. And then something subtle but telling happened. Sports business reporters began asking direct questions about media flexibility in future contracts. Not hypotheticals, direct questions. That's when the conversation officially crossed into dangerous territory. Because once journalists sense structural tension, the story evolves beyond speculation. It becomes investigation. And investigations create pressure. Pressure forces responses. And responses reveal cracks. By the end of the week, one thing was undeniable. The NBC deal had ignited a debate about the future of the WNBA's power structure. And no matter which side fans chose, one reality loomed over everything. The commissioner's biggest fear was no longer private. It was trending. But just when it seemed like the storm might plateau, a new development quietly surfaced that could redefine the entire conversation. And this final twist? It doesn't just challenge authority. It threatens to reshape the future of player leverage altogether. Just when everyone thought this was about media hype, ratings charts, and ego battles, the real twist surfaced, and it didn't come from NBC. It didn't come from the league office. It came from contract language. Because according to a high-level source close to upcoming negotiations, future player agreements may include something the WNBA has never fully embraced before: expanded individual media autonomy clauses. If that sounds technical, let me translate it for you. It means certain players, specifically those with measurable broadcast leverage, could gain more flexibility over how they appear, promote, and monetize their image across platforms. And you already know whose name is at the center of that discussion: Caitlin Clark. Now here's where it becomes explosive. If Clark negotiates independent media flexibility tied to her NBC exposure, it doesn't just affect her, it sets precedent. And precedent in professional sports is everything. Because once one star secures expanded autonomy, others follow. That creates ripple effects across salary structures, endorsement frameworks, and league-wide broadcast packaging. And according to insiders, that's the exact scenario Commissioner Kathy Engelbert has quietly feared for years. Not competition, not criticism, precedent. Because precedent weakens centralized authority. The league's power structure has always relied on collective bargaining strength and unified negotiation channels. But if a player's media value becomes quantifiable leverage, negotiations shift from we to I. And that shift changes everything. Here's the twist that made executives reportedly uneasy. NBC's internal numbers allegedly project Clark's standalone segments to outperform several established sports talk properties in specific demographics. If true, that gives her negotiating power beyond traditional athlete influence. She's not just a player, she's a content driver. And when you become a content driver in the streaming and broadcast era, your value multiplies exponentially. Now imagine this scenario. Clark's contract renewal approaches. And networks signal that her presence directly affects renewal pricing. Advertisers align campaigns around her exposure. She enters negotiations knowing her individual broadcast impact can be measured. Suddenly, the balance of power feels different. Not confrontational, but undeniable. And here's the most chilling part of all. One anonymous executive allegedly admitted, If she realizes the full scope of her leverage, the league will never negotiate the same way again. Never negotiate the same way again. That's not growth. That's structural evolution. And evolution is uncomfortable for those who built the existing system. But the final twist isn't about contracts alone. It's about culture. Because younger players are watching, agents are watching, networks are watching. If Clark's NBC partnership proves that individual star power can command independent influence, future prospects may enter the league with entirely different expectations. Expectations of autonomy, of branding control, of narrative ownership. And once narrative ownership shifts away from centralized governance, commissioners don't just manage competition, they manage personalities, movements, moments. That's exponentially harder. So here's the cliffhanger no one is ready to answer. Is this NBC deal simply smart marketing? Or is it the first domino in a quiet revolution inside the WNBA? Because if Clark's media independence expands, if advertisers continue tying dollars to her presence, if networks adjust packaging strategies around her impact, then the commissioner's biggest fear won't be hypothetical anymore. It will be operational. And once operational, it cannot be reversed without conflict. The storm hasn't peaked. It's building. Behind closed doors, discussions are intensifying. Publicly, everything remains composed. But history tells us something important. When media leverage meets institutional authority, tension is inevitable. And tension always produces a turning point. The only question now is when. And when that moment arrives. Will the league adapt or fracture? Because this story isn't ending with a broadcast deal. It's just beginning. So now I have to ask you, is this the moment everything changes? Did Caitlin Clark just accidentally expose the biggest fear inside the WNBA's front office? Or is this simply smart growth that critics are overreacting to? Because here's the truth. Whether you love her or question the hype, you cannot ignore the impact. Ratings don't lie, networks don't gamble blindly, and power always follows attention. If this NBC deal really signals the beginning of expanded player leverage, then we're not just watching a media partnership. We're watching the evolution of the league. But here's where you come in. Do you think Commissioner Kathy Engelbert is genuinely worried about losing narrative control? Or is this exactly the kind of spotlight the WNBA needs to finally break into mainstream dominance? Is Clark lifting the league or unintentionally reshaping it? I want you in the comments right now. Team league structure or team player power? Drop your take below. And don't hold back, because the next development could flip this entire situation upside down. Insiders are already hinting that more announcements may be coming. Possible scheduling shifts, expanded media appearances, even contract rumors that could confirm everything we just discussed. And if that happens, we'll be the first to break it down. So make sure you hit like if you think this story is bigger than just basketball. Subscribe if you want the next twist the second it drops. And turn on notifications. Because something tells me this NBC deal is only the beginning of a much larger shift. The fear has been exposed. The power balance is wobbling. And the next move? It might shock everyone. Stay tuned.